On this episode of Hidden Heritage, I'm going to be joined on the phone with Winnebago tribal member, cultural role model, and Brulé dancer, Garan Coons. Here's our conversation. Welcome you guys to Hidden Heritage. This episode's a little bit different. I've got a live interview here going today with a good friend of mine, Garan Coons. He's a member of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska, and he's also a member of the Brulé family. I use the word family because that's kind of how we've become over the years. It's been almost 30 years that we've been out performing, and I think this gentleman has been with us most of that entire time. Anyway, Garan Coons is on the line with me, and Garan, why don't you go ahead and say hello and just introduce yourself?
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, my name is Garan Coons. My spirit name is Agichita Gian Hokshila. My mother, Teresa St. Cyr. My father's Curtis St. Cyr. My mother belongs to the Ogallala Lakota. And so have a deep appreciation for the Lakota and the Ogallala. And we always try to get back to kind of Pine Ridge, South Dakota to visit the relatives. And my father, he was the vice chairman of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska for many, many years. And he has since passed on, but grew up in Winnebago, graduated from high school in 1999, went off. I got a full ride scholarship to Wayne State College and achieved my bachelor's degree in 2004 in graphic design and marketing. And yeah, I remember, Paul, the first time I danced with you folks, I was asked to come up and you guys had a Yankton holiday. It was a holiday concert in Yankton, South Dakota. My relatives, Denise One Star and Mike One Star, they used to dance with you guys.
That's correct.
And yeah, we grew up there. And I remember nervous, kind of first time, I did the Powwow circuit for many years and never really did anything far as theatrical, such as the show. But the first time, and I was just blown away. And then after that, I think my mom reached out to you folks because we started the Many Moccasins Dance Troupe. And that was started in our college dorm room back in my Wayne State days. And the reason for that, as you know, Paul, is because we need to educate a lot of people. We did a tour out in the East Coast with the American Indian Dance Theater. And we went to some colleges, and a lot of the people after the show came up and they said, man, we thought you guys were extinct. We didn't know that there was actual native still in the United States. And I was like, wow, that is crazy. So ever since then, we had great memories and toured all four directions, Paul, and best of memories. So appreciate having me on today.
Well, you're welcome, Garen. I tell you what, you were jogging my memory a little bit there, and I had almost forgot about that, working with Denise One Star. And that, if you were to take a wild guess at that, Garen, what year would you guess that to be? Your first performance with us?
It was in 2001.
Oh man, yeah, it's back in the early days.
Yeah, yep. And I remember, actually, my dad is a musician, and he was a harmonica player, but he played the blues. And the first time I seen you guys perform was at the the National Indian Education Consortium, I think it was called, NIEA, in Rapid City. And I think you guys opened up for Indigenous. And Indigenous, being a blues rock band, they were big in kind of late 90s, 97 to 2000s. They were on the radio station and kind of blew up. And my dad would tour along with them. But I remember you had the grand piano and you just had Nicole. And it wasn't the full production as it is now. And it was just you two. And I think you said you had a box of CDs and headed out to Rapid and see what would happen. And the story is still being told.
Well, when you start thinking back on this whole thing, it's been a longer, more dramatic journey than a person realizes. And it's good to be reminded of kind of the humble beginnings. But, like I had said when we opened up here, you and your family have been a big part of this from the start. And I think a lot of what we've done and accomplished over the years, I have to acknowledge, the additions and all the things that you and your family brought to the performance. And like you said, you actually, your family, the Many Moccasins Dance Group, you had the reason I think it worked so well is you guys kind of had a pre-rehearsed show and program already in place before you ever came to Brulé. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about the program that you guys have worked up with Many Moccasins.
Sure. I remember they used to have a achievement pal in Winnebago, and a while back there, they said we need to start training kind of the younger generation to kind of take over. Eventually, our elders are going to walk on to the spirit world, take that journey. So we need to pass the knowledge, and we need to develop like the MCs. We need to develop the arena directors, the head singers, the head dancers. And so we had a youth achievement powwow. And they used to just have like just a regular ceremony where they would just present the awards and just come up, get your trophy, and then sit back down. Well, we said a powwow celebration is a good way to achieve that. And one year I served as the master of ceremonies, very nervous. I was a junior in high school and didn't have the public speaking skills or anything like that. But I imitated what I seen at the bigger powwows and just try to relay that information. It caught up. And then from there at that powwow, we had what was called like, hey, if you want to come out and dance, you don't have to have regalia. And the regalia, as you know, take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And a lot of times the families have to get together to put an outfit for an individual on. Well, there was a lot of kids that came out in their tennis shoes and just their regular clothes that they wear to school, and they wanted to dance. And from that idea, the idea of to maybe have a dance group where they can practice, where the families, while they're practicing, can get together and start sewing regalia. And it was for the youth. It was youth driven. And we wanted to make sure that we put our best foot forward. You have the education of learning the dances. Not only that, but the kids on the reservation, there's a lot of harmful things. There's a lot of bad things. It would keep them busy. It was something positive, something cultural. It was something that they grew into. So the idea of the Many Moccasins Dance Troupe was born from what we seen at that, when we called everybody out. Hey, just come out and dance. It doesn't matter if you have a regalia. And the place was packed. And all these young kids just busted out their best moves. And from that, we were just like, we need to get a dance troupe going. We need to make sure that these kids are fostered and grow in a nice, positive atmosphere. And from that dance troupe, our first performance was at Wayne State College. It was for Native American Heritage Month. And again, a lot of professors, a lot of the student body, they didn't know a lot about that there was a reservation 40 miles east of Wayne State College. And they were like, wow, we never knew. All we heard about is Winnebago is, high alcoholism rate, suicide, poverty, all this and that. But we presented beautiful display of singing and dancing. And then in our dance troupe, we also do storytelling. So we would like to think that anytime you come and see a Many Moccasins performance, that you walk away with something educational. Maybe you learn a word. Maybe you remember that dance style that they had. So the next time you're at a powwow cultural celebration, you can recall some of that information. A lot of those kids would take back that information to their parents, and the parents would have questions. And we just kept getting booked gig to gig, school to school, college to college. And this kept us busy. So it just blossomed from there and to where we were part of the Rose Bowl parade. And from that, we went over to Saudi Arabia with Brulé, and Germany, Denmark. It was crazy.
Well, let me back up just a little bit there. That's a fantastic history, and to your credit, you and the family for following through with all that. Are you guys still doing the Many Moccasins Dance Troupe to this day?
We are.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned the Tournament of Roses parade. Now, we should really spend just a little bit of time on. I should give you just a moment to talk about that, because that was kind of a historical moment, and I should let our audience know that our group Brulé and you with our family and the dance troupe and the band all went out to Pasadena, California for the Tournament of Roses parade. We were invited there to be part of the RFD TV annual appearance. RFD TV would put a custom made float together annually and make an appearance in the Tournament of Roses parade, which is a pretty big parade. Most people know that, but this was a special one, right, Garen? And we had a float that was dedicated to the culture. And why don't you? I'll let you tell the audience how you were connected in a special way to that float that year.
This is a crazy story. Something that I think is going to be, I'm going to tell my grandchildren, Paul, about this story. So we were down at RFD TV, the theater in Branson, Missouri, and we were right in the middle of the run. And after the show, we get together, take pictures and whatnot. Well, Patrick and his crew came down there, so it was very special. And Patrick, being the founder of RFD TV, said, "Hey, Garen, I want you to meet some of my friends and check them out." So I shook their hand and everything. And one of this guy had a camera with him, and he said, "Hey, can you stand over here for a moment? I just want to take a picture." And did that pose and whatnot. Didn't think too much of it. And here, there was kind of a buzz. I get a call from Kathy and Paul, and they said, "Hey, can you kind of come in early to get ready for the show?" And I said, "Sure, yeah." And I could tell there was some excitement in the air, and I wasn't sure what it was, but it probably happened probably about 3 weeks to a month later after we took the picture. Well, when they came, I came upstairs into the theater, and they're like, "Check this out." And I seen this rendering, and the rendering was a full-blown Rose Bowl parade float. And the model was that picture that I took of me in that fancy dance outfit, that regalia. I was just like floored. I don't know, Paul, if you remember, but my jaw just like literally dropped to the floor.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a large float. And they used every part of the float had to be made out of flowers, seeds, organic. It couldn't be nothing they used a still-based structure. And then they decorated with thousands of flowers, seeds. There was even like hay grass. There was different things, and even down to like the hair was braided. I was just like, wow, that is cool. And they literally, where my beads were, they put beads that were of flowers in that beaded area. And it was in 2011. We, kind of fast forward. I think we went out there and took a trip out there to see the progress. And again, every time I would see that float, it just amazed me. And the whole mission behind it was called One Nation, in that we would get and reach out to all 500 and over 500 different tribes, invite them to participate in this Tournament of Roses parade. It was called Building Dreams, Friendships, and Memories.
There you go.
And it was a fantastic thing that I remember very well, just because, yeah, they did pretty good on the rendering, the bustles, and then just the whole education of it. I still have those pins. They have commemorative pins that you put on your regalia, and I still have those. And the rendering was fantastic. They had the Brulé band. It was crazy coming down. I couldn't imagine seeing that coming down Pasadena, especially being kind of something that was dedicated to the Native American culture and the fancy dance in itself. I always been a fancy dancer. My mom started me out as a fancy dancer, but the whole kind of story behind fancy dance, that it was introduced to give people a good feeling. You see somebody dancing hard, you smile, you see them hit that stop right at the end, and you're just like, wow, that was fantastic. And the contemporariness, but you still paying homage to the old, our traditions, our culture, was fantastic how they put that float together.
So not only did the float was dedicated to the culture, but you were the centerpiece. I mean, they used your image they made you bigger than life image of you that was taken from the picture. And that was the centerpiece of the float. And that was like 25, 30 feet high. Right in the center of the float. And then, of course, us guys in the Brulé band, we were up there playing on the float. Right in front of your big image, which was like a statue behind us. And then, of course, we had live dancers that followed us along on the float, if you remember that. So in front and behind the float, we had, I don't know how many dancers we had there, but that was a pretty exciting time. And one of the things I remember, Garen, that kind of took me back a little bit. I actually had to stop and think about it. And I was watching the replay of the parade route that year, and one of the announcers had made a comment about the viewership, the number of people that watched that parade. And so I always tell people, they go, if they ask me, they go, "What's the biggest audience that you guys have ever played for?" And I go, "Well, I got to think a little bit. Oh yeah, I remember now. We played for We had an audience of 20 million. Everybody, they kind of stop and look at me. But that's what they had said that's what the announcers had said. They said that it's not unusual to have a worldwide viewership of that parade and gets up to 20 million viewers. And so you think about that, and that kind of sets you back a little bit.
Right. It was larger than life. Just being out there was something that I remember to this day. We had to get up pretty early before the sun came up, in fact, and they got us ready. But one of the big challenges for that float is that it needed to go under an overpass. And that was something that they kind of went rounds about. But Patrick himself, he said, make it happen. And what they end up doing is they had some hydraulic system in there where the whole kind of head portion top where the roach was, the bustle, it moved forward right down below you guys. And it sure enough, it made it under that overpass. That was kind of one of the highlights. But I remember too, is that when you first start out, you have to make that turn. And the float is kind of like on a semi bed. And there's a driver in there that has a wheel and, kind of, I think they use, I'm not even sure, comm systems or whatever. I never kind of understood that one, but they had to make a turn. It was a hard turn too, wasn't it, Paul? It was like 90 degrees. And if you made that turn seamlessly, the crowd would just roar. And I remember it was so loud. We had the loudspeaker for Brulé to play and stuff, but that right there still echoes in my ears to this day. When we made that turn and seeing the millions of people there was probably 1 million people just on the road just to view this thing itself. And it was a wonderful time.
One of my favorite memories, Garen, is kind of, there's a little humorous side to this, but you had mentioned that we had to get up quite early that day to get ready for the parade route. And so all the floats are lined up, and then you take your position and your float's back there, like maybe 20, 30 back deep, and it's still dark out, right? So we're all up there getting ready. And they had the red coat guys or something, white coats or red coat, I don't remember, but they all had a certain colored jacket on so you could identify them. And one of them came by and said, "No, we don't want you to make it too much noise here while we're in line, and so that it's just the protocol that we have." And so our sound engineer, Joe Adam, if you remember, Garen he was stationed underneath the float too. He had like a little cockpit down below, along with the driver down there. And so they locked him in. They couldn't see him. He squeezed into his little spot there, and they closed the latch, like he was inside of a tank or something. And then our signal to start our music. We had some music that we were going to play, but we didn't want to start it until we started the actual moving into the route. And I said, "I'll stop." I told Joe, I said, "I'll stop 3 times up here on the deck when I want you to kick in the sound on the PA." And we're up on the deck, and so Chris Estes is up there. He was one of the dancers up on top of the deck with us. And Chris and it was kind of chilly out that morning. He's kind of huddling up and had a big jacket around. He's kind of shaking, and he goes, "Oh man, it's cold out this morning." And he was kind of wiggling around, and he was moving his feet, and he stomped his foot 3 times. And all of a sudden, Joe all of a sudden kicks in our audio, and we had this, I think we had the Neil Diamond song "Coming to America" blasted out, and it just reverberated up and down that line. The redcoats came running over. Stop. But just one of the things I remember is we had a shaky start, but we got into it. Once we figured out what we were doing, we got rolling. So that was a good memory. I had to get that in there. But now, Garen, I want to switch gears a little bit here with you.
Hidden heritage. Stories from across Native America.
One of the things that I was always impressed by getting to know you and your family, it has to do with your reservation. And so I'm going to set it up this way, and I'm going to have you maybe just tell us a little bit about the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. But my experience, I was reunited, of course, with my family back in the year 1993. I've told my story many times. And our tribe, the Lower Brulé Sioux tribes out in central South Dakota. As a matter of fact, most of the Lakota and Dakota tribes are from that area. And a lot of those reservations out there are quite impoverished, as you know, because you're connected with like Pine Ridge too. And Of course, Pine Ridge is the second largest reservation in the United States, but it's also high on the poverty level. And I think most people know that. So I had kind of come from this background of some of these poor reservations down in South Dakota. And a lot of the reservations across the country have that common problem. And the first time I came to visit you guys on the Winnebago reservation, I drove in and it was like, I couldn't believe it. It was like a model community. And everything was pristine and clean, and the roads were beautiful, and it really just surprised me. And it made such an impression that I made notes and actually did a little program on it. But Garen, tell us a little bit about what's the distinction? How come we see like some of these reservations out there in South Dakota, North Dakota, that suffer from these problems of poverty and high unemployment, things of that sort? And what have you guys done there that's made such a big difference? I was blown away by what you guys have accomplished there.
Yeah, good question, Paul. There's a combination of things resulting from when we had the rights of getting just even voting rights as Native nations. And so let me back up just a little bit. The Winnebago tribe they originated from Wisconsin. The Ho-Chunk lands, and their creation story goes back to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And from that, as time goes on and as the settlers kind of come into the area, unfortunately, they were forcibly removed by the United States government, and they were removed to Iowa. They went up to Minnesota. They even went up to Crow Creek, South Dakota. And in Crow Creek, South Dakota, the Ho-Chunks were kind of known as farmers and stuff, but they were put on reservations, and this is in the 1800s. And what they did is a lot of the children, the elderly, and those that made the trip, they were starving. And so when they were moved again from Minnesota, they were steamboat down to Mississippi, and then they came up by steamboat through the Missouri River. Along that trip there, they seen the Omaha, and they remembered that. And then they settled up there in Crow Creek, South Dakota. But while they were starving, the chiefs, the leaders at the time, they sent some scouts down the Missouri River to negotiate with the Omaha to purchase land. And that's why the Winnebago land right now is in Winnebago, Nebraska. And they settled there. So they purchased the land. And they had some trying times. And unfortunately, there's a thing called, when you get land, you have to put it in trust, meaning that when it's in trust, there's certain restrictions that apply to that. And, then they had the allotment era where you could sell your land. And so a lot of times the land became checkerboard, where farmers would come in, they would purchase the land off of a family, and, they would farm it. We wouldn't get any revenue off that. So I remember in the 80s, even, I was born in 1981, and I grew up in Winnebago. So like 1985, 1986, it was pretty poverty stricken. And a lot of our family members, the life expectancy didn't last. It wasn't high. And a lot of people passed away in their 60s, so which is pretty early, even down. I think the average age is like 8 years before the average life expectancy of a natural Native American or a United States citizen. And so from that, we started to research, learn tribal sovereignty and what that meant to the Winnebago tribe. And with tribal sovereignty, there was afforded some advantages, also disadvantages, but we learned some of those things as far as what tribal sovereignty means. And I remember one time a person said, "You live on the reservation?" I said, "Yeah, I live on the reservation." They're like, "Wow, what time do the gates open up?" So it's kind of like that thing back in the 1800s, under the Andrew Jackson administration, it was pretty bad. But you fast forward, and those laws that were made, the tribal sovereignty, and you come into the 1970s when we were recognized and we were allowed to vote, the Indian Reorganization Act, they put in what they call a kind of a IRA constitution that the tribe would form. And from that, before that constitution, we would go by the 12 clans system. And each clan had its duty. So we had our chief clan system. We had our security clan system, which belongs to the Bear clan. And then we were given this constitution. And from that, we changed over to a tribal council. So we would elect and have voting. We would elect and have, a chairman or chairwoman come into power. And from that, it's a 9-seat, right? Today, it's a 9-seat tribal council. Well, I'll go through the years and stuff. In the background, there's some gaming things happening with bingo. Iowa, Nevada, and I want to say New Jersey were the ones that kind of really brought in some gaming. And our forefathers, they had the knowledge to develop a casino. And with that casino, it was the first in the lands. And I remember they just had their, I want to say their 32nd or 33rd anniversary of what was called the Winnebago Casino. And 32 years ago, they opened their doors, and a lot of people, you can only go to a casino in Las Vegas or New Jersey, or you could go to a casino in Iowa. And so we had a lot of people come from Sioux City. We had a lot of people come from Omaha. All 4 directions would come to Winnebago Casino. Millions of dollars were pouring into Winnebago, almost like we'd never seen that type of money before. So they decided, that they were going to do 2 different things. One is they're going to reinvest into an economic development arm. And that was what they call HCI, Ho Chunk Incorporated. And then the second thing they're going to do is they were going to invest into a portfolio and just keep that for a rainy day. So Iowa decided to allow other casinos, riverboat casinos, to develop. So one developed down in Council Bluffs, Iowa. One developed in Sioux City. So we were making millions, and then when those casinos opened up, it all faded away. It's almost like they forgot about the natives, and but we had that startup money. So when I talked about HCI, what their mission was to diversify those profits from that casino. And so they invested into hotels, gas stations. They started to do some government contracting. They started an online shop. And then from there, they also started a nonprofit organization called Ho Chunk Community Development Corporation. And that was a nonprofit organization for the economic development arm and for the Winnebago tribe. And so from that, you have this economic development arm. And one is what causes poverty is no jobs. So HCI started to provide jobs. And then the other thing too is I need an education. So we have a college. It's called Little Priest Tribal College. And Little Priest himself, he was the last war chief of the Winnebago tribe. He was the one that went up and he fought on behalf of the Winnebago tribe, but he also fought on behalf of the United States government. They gave him a flag. And unfortunately, he succumbed to a battle. And he was in battle, and they brought him home. And they said, well, let's have a celebration, a homecoming celebration for him. And that was 158 years ago. And then a few days later, he passed on. He didn't make it. And so we always have that celebration. It's called the Winnebago Homecoming Celebration in honor of Chief Little Priest and the Company A Scouts. And they say that when he was in battle, he turned into a grizzly bear. And he belonged to the Bear clan, and they have many, many songs on his behalf. So here to this day, we still have that celebration. But not only do we honor Chief Little Priest, we honor all veterans, no matter what race, where you come from, what branch or anything like that. If you served in the United States military, we have a lot of veterans that come from all 4 parts. And this past July here, I met a guy that came all the way from Maine. And he circles those dates on his calendar because he feels welcomed here in Winnebago, Nebraska. And he's a veteran. When he came back from Vietnam War, he wasn't welcomed. And when he comes to Winnebago, he just feels that hospitality. So he tries to make it every year, depending on his health. So back to HCI, they started to create the jobs. They started to diversify. And from there, there's just a lack of housing on all reservations. You go to a reservation and stuff, there's just families living with families, and there's a lot of people in that. It's a hard thing to do. And there's a reason for that. There's two assumptions out there, Paul. One is native tribes get a lot of money, and that's not true. As you could see, the Winnebago Casino was thriving there for about 2 years, and then all of a sudden, the doors start kind of really, it's a meager operation now. It's not as prominent as it once was. They do a great job with what's given, but there's casinos all directions. I think this place is saturated with a lot of casinos and stuff. We have some Hard Rock Casino in Sioux City. There's 3 of them down there in Council Bluffs. There's some in Emmitsburg, Iowa. This all over the place. There's also the North Sioux City where they have the little casinos. So it's a tough ask to try to bring in what once was. But from that, they decided to, like I said, diversify their profits, and HCI just took off. And they literally like threw some fire on it, and they just start growing year over year over year, where it's just kind of I like to use an analogy. They're like an amoeba, where they're just they even develop like a housing corporation where they build houses. So if you have a problem, what's our problem? We don't have a lot of houses and stuff. Okay, well, we need to go buy a housing business. And so they went and bought a housing business, and they just kept investing. And they have what is called a 100-year plan. And in that 100-year plan, there's a lot of different things and aspects of, a lot of tribes, they do what are called per capita payments to their tribal members. And that's kind of like a profit sharing kind of, how they do in big corporations and stuff. They kind of shied away from that, because a lot of times when we would do, let's say we did like a $500 payment to every tribal member. We have over 5,000 tribal members, but so it equals, 2-point-something million dollars. That $500 would go to off the reservation. It would go up north to those corporations, or go down south, or wherever, Kansas, Minnesota, Minneapolis, whatever it may be. And it didn't pay for a lot. But if you invest, $2-some million into a business that generates more money, you can see how it just kind of starts to eat up and starts to grow bigger and bigger in a positive way. So with that, there's just a lot of different things that they're getting into. And with the wherewithal with the tribe, HCI and the tribe, they work hand in hand. So I like to think of the tribe as the father, and Winnebago Casino is a good son. And then HCI is also another good son. And so the Winnebago tribe and the leaders, they had that wherewithal to know that, hey, the casino profits are not going to live forever. We have to diversify. We have to make sure that our profits go into something that keeps generating something positive for the tribe, whether that be more money, more jobs, more houses. We even have a car dealership that they invested into. So,
wow.
Long story short, that's how kind of where we're at today.
If I have this right, you guys have done, I mentioned earlier in this conversation that I considered your community kind of a model community, but now I see why, because, you guys took the business approach early on when a lot of tribes didn't do that. And thanks for your explanation about the casino world too, because there's a lot of misconceptions about that. And you and I both know there's a handful of really successful tribal casinos around the country. And, the impression is that those per capita payments that go out to a handful of those tribes, a very small percentage, they shell out these large per capita payments, and then of course they think everybody's getting that, and that's not the case, And not only that, but maybe they're shelling out the big, per capita payments, but they aren't really reinvesting back into the community like you guys have done. So it really has been a smart approach that you've taken. You guys were smart enough early on when the profits were there to reinvest some of those earnings. And now I guess what you see when you drive on to your casino is pretty impressive. And so, congratulations to you guys for taking the high road there. Like I say, you don't see it very often. There's over 550 some recognized tribes across the country, and I haven't been to all of them. I've been to quite a few, and you really you don't pull into the reservation and see a community like what you guys have put together there. So it's really good what's happened. I hope that others will follow suit. I should mention too that your reservation is located, and that's got a lot to do with your early success with your casino too. You'd mentioned it's kind of tucked in between Omaha, Nebraska, Sioux City, Iowa, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and probably even up in Minneapolis area. You're kind of in the middle of all that. So you had some areas to pull in people for that casino too. There's a lot of little casinos out there in South Dakota, but they don't have the population mass there to really pull in large numbers to even get a fighting start for some of those casinos. But
Yeah.
You guys had that good location tucked along Interstate 29 and kind of along the Missouri River, and that was I think an advantage too back in the early days. So
Yeah. And then one things that we talk about, diversifying and everything, but you remember what happened to Winnebago's casino is we had to negotiate with the state of Nebraska, or state of Iowa, excuse me, and we had to negotiate. There's the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, and in that, it's a federal law where tribes can negotiate with states, because the states at the time are like, hey, wait a minute, like we don't want a casino in our lands and stuff, but see, that tribal sovereignty, that's a big word for us, and we exercise our rights. Is that, if you think of tribal sovereignty, I like to think of it as like we're little nations inside the United States. We have some statuses that are afforded to us that allow us to regulatory ourselves, that we have our little governments that, can oversee our area, but we still have to live within the United States laws, So it's pretty interesting how that works out. But the state of Iowa decided, hey, we're just not going to have casinos just on Indian lands. That's how it started out. We want to open it up to everybody. And we protested to them and said, hey, if you do that, there's a lot of people that are going to be without work. We're doing a lot of positive things with the profits. We're not sending it off to corporations in Vegas. At that time, a long time ago, what was mob affiliated ties, with casinos and everything too. We're not doing that. It's going back into the Winnebago Indian Reservation and into the people. Well, they just kind of turned their backs to the Winnebago tribe, and they allowed it to happen. And so there's always been kind of a chip on their shoulder. And from that, HCI decided, like, all right, well, let's focus on Nebraska. Why doesn't Nebraska have gaming? And that's a good question. So a lot of Omaha, Nebraska has a huge population. You go across the river, they have casinos there. They have 3 of them. A lot of that money that comes from Nebraska goes into Iowa. And so HCI is like, why is it doing that? Why isn't the Nebraska money staying in Nebraska? And they did a campaign to change the Nebraska Constitution to allow gaming. That happened in 2020. And what ended up happening is that HCI are allowed to develop casinos. So when that election happened, born was what they called New Casinos, Warhorse Casino. And they put them into the metropolitan areas of Nebraska. So they have a temporary facility. These are currently being built, Paul. One in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then one in Omaha, Nebraska. And in fact, yeah. And so it's kind of like they've been working on that for almost over 30 years and allow that to happen. And just a lot of fighting by tribal members, the educated people. The CEO of HCI is Lance Morgan. He has a Harvard degree and just the economic guru. and been kind of trying to get back at some of those things. And so lo and behold, it kind of all came full circle. Is that, there's a motto that the council kind of says, like, we never give up. And they seen what happened to Winnebago back in the Iowa days, and now they're focusing on Nebraska so that they keep the money in Nebraska and it keeps flowing back to the tribe. But they worked out an agreement. One of the things, and some of the things that when they passed that constitution reform, is that it needs to be connected to a horse track. And horses are very sacred to us anyway. So they partnered up with what they call the Horsemen's Development. And so Warhorse and the Horsemen and the Winnebago Tribe have 2 casinos in the metropolitan areas of Omaha, Nebraska and Lincoln, Nebraska.
Yeah, that's news to me. I had no idea that all that transformation was taking place, but now it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. The idea is that, again, we need a lot of housing. There's different entities. There's a lot of children that are coming up. But at the heart of it, there's that need to make sure that we don't lose our identity. And my brother, Lewis, is actually the director of what they call the Ho-Chunk Renaissance Language Revitalization Program. We only have probably a handful of fluent speakers that speak the Ho-Chunk language left. And it goes back to that boarding school era where Captain Henry Pratt said, let's gather all the Native American children. And his philosophy was to kill the Indian to save the man. And in that, they said, okay, you're going to learn English. You're going to learn the modern way. You're going to learn how to be a farmer. You're not going to be a native. And so when they would take them to the boarding schools, the closest boarding school that we have down here is Genoa Indian Boarding School. And there was thousands of Native children that would come. They were stripped of their hair. They were stripped of their language and all that. Then you send them back to the reservation. And my grandmother, she was part of the boarding school. She wasn't allowed to speak her language. And so it was, she would get hit by a ruler on the hands if she spoke her language. So my mother, she can understand it, but she can't speak it. Then you come to me, I can barely make out some words and I can barely speak some words. So in 3 generations, you're wiping out a language. And his mission is to make sure that we've revitalized the Winnebago tribe, because without the language, there's the loss of stories, the creation story, the songs that are in the language. We lose those, and we just dilute a lot of the principal stories that we have. There's teachings in those stories that we tell children. And if you don't have the language, then really, you're not really a tribe anymore. So we just have a lot of irons in the fire. There's just a full front kind of war that we're trying to combat, is making sure that we vitalize the language, get our children to make sure it's doing that. There's a lot of people that it's still in. And we just don't know with the government administration, as it changes, what they're going to do to Native tribes. They probably don't like the tribal sovereignty status. And so we're always at a threat for that. And we're trying to kind of hurry up and speed the process and erase what took place many generations ago in order to kind of live in both of those worlds, the traditional cultural aspect of the world, but yet succeed in the modern society.
Well, you guys are doing it. I think it's probably wise, in just listening to you, Garen, probably wise for others like myself and members of other tribal communities to kind of keep an eye on you guys, just to see what kind of progress you're making and how some of these fronts are coming along. So, on behalf of a lot of us out here, thanks for keeping up that fight, and the preservation of the language is very important, like you had mentioned. And of course, the business model you guys have got, all very commendable. I wanted to just mention a couple things here, Garen, too, because when I first started looking up some information on the Winnebago tribe, I saw your name pop up, and here we are. We're doing a podcast right now, speaking back and forth. But you've also got just quickly tell us about you got a radio station that you run, and you're kind of, I saw your name pop up, Garen, and I think you had a title of, let's see, I've got it here somewhere, like program director or something. Communication director. Here it is right here. So along with your work in a radio station, you're a communication director and you're running a podcast. Just tell us a little bit about that. It's very exciting.
Sure. We had the opportunity when I first started as communications, and this is after we got back from the Branson run, Paul. And one of the things I wanted to do is really thank you, because I had the opportunity. Remember when we were at Branson and you had the project of Hidden Heritage. And that was a wonderful project. And he said, "Hey, Garen, you got a graphic design degree. Do you know anything about video editing?" And I said, "Well, I kind of dabble in it, not too much and stuff." "Well, let's sit down and let's do some training and stuff." So we did. Got to work on the most wonderful stories. I remember Jerome Kills Small and us traveling, me, Shane, Chris. We would go capture the stories, come back, you would edit it, stay up there at Sioux Falls a couple of weekends. And, we would just punch out those Hidden Heritage episodes. From that, learned some great skills, Paul. I mean, it was just amazing. Took some of those episodes, gave them to the Winnebago Tribe. They said, "Hey, we have this communications officer, this communications director job. Why don't you apply for it?" I tried it. I ended up eventually getting it. So it was a one-man band at the time. I was just one man in the show here. And I was like, okay. And as we go along, we have a Winnebago in the News. And they're like, "Well, you're the director of communications. Why don't you take over the Winnebago in the News?" And it's a biweekly publication. It's about 12 pages that we do. We do the tribal council minutes and some good stories in there and tell jokes and whatnot and stuff. So Winnebago in the News keeps a lot of people informed, especially our brothers and sisters behind bars and those that can't be on the reservation. And then the pandemic hits. And when the pandemic hits, it changes our whole model of getting information out. Yeah, we have our social media, we have Facebook page and everything too, but there was a lot of people that started to go and watch streams and live streams. So we had to learn, and without the Hidden Heritage knowledge that you gave me, I wouldn't know how to operate a camera. I wouldn't know how to edit, anything like that. So that knowledge I applied to here at the Winnebago Tribe. And I swear some of that information that during the COVID pandemic that we got out to the elders and to the Winnebago Tribe saved lives. And from that, we had a radio station license. Now, when we got word that we were going to have a radio station license, this is 2017. They're like, "Hey, Garen, we got a radio station license." I was like, "Oh, cool. So we can be on the radio?" And they're like, "Yeah, get it up and going. You're the communications director, get it up and going." Well, the radio station license is just like a driver's license. It's just a card. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you still have to buy the car in order to get on the radio.
Gotcha.
And so I did some research and I was like, okay, well, how much is it going to cost to get us on the air? Over 200,000. It's not much. Your department can afford that, right? Wrong. We were barely getting along as it is and stuff. So the pandemic hits. What they call the American Rescue Plan Act came to the tribe. And I think I wanted to say it was over $50 million that came to the tribe. And a lot of it went to immediate responses. But they said, how can we get information out to basically save the lives of the Winnebago tribal people? Radio station is a good way. So we put some resources to that. And from the pandemic, the radio station is 100.9 FM. It's called the Big Voice Radio. And Winnebago tribe, they're the Ho-Chunk. And Ho-Chunk means big voice. People, their parent speech, people of the big voice. So we have our own radio station. I didn't know anything about radio station. I called out to the Paiute Indian Reservation. They have a beautiful radio station that's been operating for many, many years. I call them up, Paul, and I said, "Hey, I'm Garen from the Winnebago Tribe. We're thinking about getting into radio. Do you have any advice for us? How do we get started? Do you have a manual? Anything would be helpful." The lady on the line, she said, "You're getting into radio?" And I said, "Yeah, we want to." And she said, "Make sure you run." Run the other way. She said, "Don't do it."
I tell people that sometimes when they're thinking about getting into music, jokingly, but you know how tough of a road that is. I understand that. Well, you guys followed through on it. So you must have gotten some advice from them.
Yeah, so we did get some advice, and with the partnership, so it's a lot of organizations, entities, engineers, everything. Yeah, March, we were on the air and off and running, and we do Powwow programming. We also do a show I host it. It's called Winnebago Talks, and It's anything that relates to the area, the nationally, anything that has to do with kind of like the Winnebago tribe. A lot of people see the value in getting that information. And there's a lot of people out there. I had one guest on, and he came down, and his name was Dwayne, and he was adopted out, and he didn't know much about the Winnebago tribe. But the information that we put on the radio station, the music, the stories, just chatting with people, the different entities, he started to kind of rebuild that connection with the Winnebago tribe. And he had it in his heart and soul to come and talk to us and give us a big thanks and stuff. It was the most memorable interview that I had. Is that, you have the voice, you have the means, you have the tools to get that out to the people, and you're connecting with people. We also have an internet radio. And if you go to the Winnebago Tribe website, and we can track that data, there's people that are from Winnebago overseas, and they tune in and they have that connection back here to the Winnebago reservation. So anything that we do as far as the shows, music and powwow music or anything like that, we always try to keep that with a keen eye. We try to put our best foot forward for the people.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hidden Heritage and our visit with Garan Coons. I'm Paul LaRoche, bringing you stories from across Native America.